Hello, everyone. Welcome to Yemidi Media's weekly show, The H Panel. The H Panel today will be talking about Russia-Africa Summit, Ethiopia, and Eritrea in that summit. This summit was the second, and the first was held in 2019. This one, the second one, was held just July 27th and 28th. So we'll be talking about that with the H Panel as the main topic today. Um, Glad to be joined by Faisal Robla and Duke Burbridge today. As usual, we'll start with the main segment. The first segment, I must say, the first segment is what stood out for each of the panelists. Faisal, can you start us off with the highlight of the week for you?
Yeah, I think what stood out for me is Abiy's alleged claim that he is seeking a port. It has really been catching fire and has been covered quite a lot. I myself, and I may share on the screen, I myself received, this is a Somali written text that was given to me by somebody in Addis Ababa who is a member of the Somali parliament, member, meaning the federal member of the Somali section. And as far back as June 9, that's when this gentleman sent me this Somali written text. And basically what it says is, Faisal, I would like to inform you that Abiy has told the PP Central Committee or Executive Committee in its last meeting that he intends to get a port, no matter what, anywhere on the Red Sea, from one corner to the other, and talked in detail by even sometimes mentioning some of the ports that he's interested, including Asab and Somali ports, Berbera and Zayla. And basically, according to this text written to me on June 9th, that means it should have happened, probably the meeting happened on June 8th or around that time, but we can verify that he said, one person asked and said, Mr. Prime Minister, how are we getting that? How are we achieving that goal? And basically he said, if you guys walk with me and you stand by me, by hook or crook, in any means necessary, we will get a port. This second one that's coming out, as he told to some businessmen and women, is probably the second iteration of this whole situation. And with that, we know that he has never hidden his intent to get Somalia and Ethiopia unified for the sake of port access. When Mohammed Abdullahi Farmajo was the president, on the corridors of Villa Somalia, as soon as they came out from a meeting, Prime Minister Abiy declared and said that the two countries will unify and become one country. In addition to that, we are aware of the fact that he is building a modern navy. So one can only surmise that he is building a navy with the anticipation that Ethiopia will have a port. Other than that, he either misspoke, which is not really possible in my opinion, because this theme has been coming back quite some time, and B, he has the tendency to wish goals without evaluating the viability of the goals that he sets. And then three, I think he probably wanted to use this to kind of woo some of the detractors, his initial support base, which we know are very much married historically and otherwise to the concept of Pax Ethiopiana with its access to the Red Sea. So if you look at those all factors, it's quite possible whether he will walk away and or his handlers will make an excuse and create a scenario where he can walk away. That's fine, but too many people heard this and too many people received information from different corners, so it's very tough for him to walk away from this.
Interesting. Thank you, Faisal, for that. I think this topic merits its own show, given the number of possibilities behind his declaration. You know, all that is a possible interpretation. Duke, what is the highlight for you? And welcome again after some break.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, for me, it's mostly the humanitarian situation. The pause on food distribution in Tigray is now grinding on for 120 days, more than 120 days now. And the situation is getting very desperate in Tigray. A recent food assessment, the first conducted since the food suspension, has shown that the severe acute malnutrition has spiked in Tigray since the food suspension. Severe food insecurity has also spiked since the suspension. What you look at on your screen is a comparison of the past 4 food assessments that have been taken. The most recent one was from Mekelle University and also the Tigrayan Health. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Tigray Health Research Institute. Put the last one out. I was able to review the methodology. It was a rigorous methodology. And what they found was that the impact on the 2 zones that they were able to study, Central and Southeastern Zone, was more severe from the aid suspension than the previous siege. So we are talking about Tigray being plunged back into this very severe food crisis that is happening quite aside from war or peace. It seems that the peace process has not led to any relief for the people of Tigray who are starving right now because of this food suspension. It's been going on for a significantly long time, much longer than I can imagine that they hoped that it would go on for. I think that they possibly thought that they would get some support. USAID thought that they might get some support from the Department of State. Department of State does not seem to be pressuring Ethiopia to come to the table and have meaningful negotiations on the terms that were laid out. I mean, everything's being kept behind closed doors. So you may have there may be an announcement tomorrow that says everything's fine and we're going to start doing it again, because they've completely stonewalled the media on this. Most of the information, almost all of the information that we're getting is from leaks. But the most recent food assessment that was conducted in June really puts the stakes in perspective here. If you look at in Adwa, and this is the district surrounding the town of Adwa. This wasn't necessarily in Adwa, but in the district surrounding the town of Adwa, you were looking at 30% severe acute malnutrition in babies. This is 6 months old to 23 months old. 30% severe acute malnutrition. These babies are starving to death. And there doesn't seem to be any progress. They convened, this meeting of, the Ethiopian government, World Food Program, and these guys, to say that they were going to investigate it. And there's been no development since then. There's been an investigation conducted in Tigray that turned up maybe 7,000 metric tons of food was stolen out of 200,000. That's not a severe loss in as far as humanitarian aid goes. You look at it losing maybe 5%, 10%. If that's all it is, then we really have to question the wisdom of pausing aid even for a couple of weeks. Certainly not. I mean, the real problem here is that by the USAID and World Food Program pausing aid, it's effectively declaring Ethiopia and Tigray just a place where aid cannot be distributed, where food aid cannot be distributed. And that's a very dangerous statement to make, because it doesn't allow for other countries to come in. It's very difficult to raise money I mean, they're running out of money for the humanitarian response in Ethiopia, and it's very difficult to get countries to pledge more money when it's very obvious that they are not able to get food to people who need it. So it's a very desperate situation right now. This is a potential spoiler for the peace process, this aid pause, and it's remarkable for the lack of information that's been coming out of USAID and the World Food Program. If you can remember back a year ago when the siege was supposed to be lifted and not quite lifted, Samantha Power was out in front of Congress being very forceful about the fact that food was sitting in warehouses, not able to be distributed. People were suffering. She was very forceful about that. We don't see anything anymore from that. And just one other quick point is when you look at the food insecurity and the way it went down in the February food assessment, which was not published by the WFP, but most people have seen it by now. This tends to indicate that it worked, that food distribution in Tigray had a considerable impact on severe food insecurity. Now, this was the time, according to Cindy McCain in her most recent interview, this was the time that a considerable amount of diversion took place. So it really challenges the narrative, it sort of punches holes in that narrative that food insecurity, severe food insecurity dropped so significantly from last June to February. That shouldn't have happened if the food wasn't getting to the people. And the spike in food insecurity that we're seeing right now is very severe, and it's very, very frightening for anybody looking at the situation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Duke, for that highlights. It's very important. This is not forgotten in the pile of all kind of information that's coming out of the region. Faisal, we want to start with the main topic, Ethiopia and Eritrea at the Russia and Africa Summit. I'm sure we will maybe end up talking more about Eritrea than Ethiopia. Let's start with these two very short clips for our introduction. This is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia arriving, and among others, his defense minister is there. We'll see the defense minister will be the one to attend until the end, I guess. We heard the Prime Minister left early. We didn't see the Prime Minister speaking. If you have seen one, you can, reflect on that later. But we saw a lot of videos, the President of Eritrea speaking. Among others, this very short clip would be a good introduction to our topic today.
Money, they are not manufacturing anything at all. It's printing money. And this has been one of their weapons globally. The monetary system, the global monetary system, controlled by dollar and euro, has been used. Sanctions here, sanctions there, sanctions there, grabbing this account, grabbing that account, has been one of their tools. This is not going to continue indefinitely. And we need a new financial architecture globally. Not controlled by euro, not controlled by the dollar, not controlled by other currencies.
Faisal, first maybe I want to hear your opening thoughts on the summit in general, and then we'll go into Ethiopia and Eritrea's presence there.
I think from my point of view, the entire summit is a sad saga about Africa. It's very sad in 2023 for African leaders to run around and beg for food, the basic minimum human requirement to produce when they came from Stone Age to any other level of development, especially countries like Ethiopia, where God has endowed with the two elements of food production, that's good soil and plenty of water. There is nothing that you can really rationalize about this. First, that's the sad story. The second, I think this was a downgraded Russia-Africa summit. Only about 16, 17 leaders were there. The rest were delegates such as ministers and foreign ministers, as opposed to the one that the US had a few months ago, where about 49, I think, or close to 48 leaders were there. Now, there are two really major pictures that emerge from this, from my understanding, for the people of the Horn of Africa that need to be analyzed. Now, one, I feel Abiy was sidelined. For whatever reason, Abiy was sidelined. He was not given, or he did not choose to take a prime time to speak. Whether he avoided because of the pending loan requests or because of his negotiations with the West, he did not. But he was not some of the major players at this, either the Senegalese president or Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea. So I will just leave Abiy's role. Now, Ethiopia and what she's promised is another thing. But Abiy, in my opinion, was, you can see when he's sitting in the back and others are speaking, he was not even given a front row seat. And in diplomatic nuance, that is really, no other way to read except to downgrade it. With Isaias, he played a star role, right or wrong, whether you agree or disagree. The second Africa-Russia summit was largely Isaias' show. Basically, he put himself in bar with a major country that is giving advice, whether that's flattering or not, but advice to Putin and Russia to see them that everybody doesn't see Russia as a country that's falling. At least some countries like his country, see Russia still as a power to be reckoned. Whether that's his own fragmentation or not is another thing. But he repeated, I listened to that speech, that he is saying there's nothing called Ukrainian war, that Russia is engaged, EU and the NATO is faltering and breaking at seams. They have no power. Ukraine is just a sacrificial lamb for NATO because they wanted to test how Russia would, act. And now Russia is teaching them a lesson. How do we come? And then he goes to looking into the future for those African countries, including his, as to how to engage Russia. We have to come up with a plan. We have to, deal with the monetary system that's now dominating us, that comes from the West into a new venue. He goes on. And then basically he literally impresses with President Putin that Eritrea has already a very well worked out, well detailed infrastructural plan that we handed already to your aides, and they will be looking at. And he says we are looking into economic development, agriculture, engineering, farming, implementation of mining sector, and what have you. So I think on the one hand, he showed to the West that he doesn't give a damn what they think about him. Whether that is a madness or not, I cannot say. But basically, Isaiah seems somebody who doesn't listen to what the West says, and he goes on his way. Now, this is my analysis. That was the message. My analysis is I think Isaiah is a headache for Abiy, because Isaiah already casted his lot with the Russian camp. They will come and help him. What would Abiy do? If Abiy takes a different line in the geopolitics of the Horn of Africa that Isaiah doesn't like, then the two will be entangled. Would Abiy stay with the West, seeing as he needs as much as $12 billion to resuscitate his economy, and then defy not Russia, but defy Abiy, Isaias, who considers himself as the big boy around the corner? Or would Abiy abandon the West and then play the same role that Isaias is playing? Those are the issues that we need to really look at in the future. Just I read the comments under the video that Isaias' speech covered. Overwhelmingly, and African is always get in many aspects is wrong if you take it from the 1970s up to now, when dictators come into the political service and tyrants, because rhetoric seems to sell Africa very well. I think it's a lot of people who are disgruntled with the West and the historical, bad history that many Africans had with the West. The comments are painting Isaias as a hero, as the son of Africa that they never had. And I was really surprised. And, we have to see what Russia can do. But when you look at the history of Africa, particularly the Horn, we haven't inherited anything from Russia except weapons, wars, and tyrants that lived longer than they expected. So I will stop here.
Great. Thank you, Faisal, for that great opening remark. To your point, yes, there were very few leaders present in this second summit, even compared with the first one. So in 2019, there were around 43 head of states. Now, way less than 20. So, and this Guardian is showing that Russia actually was blaming about the West's pressure on these leaders and so on. Duke, later on, I will come to you in terms of how the US should read this, if there is any misreading and so on. The same with Faisal. But what is your overall take on this summit? What you saw, what you read, and so on?
Well, I'm not surprised that they had a smaller turnout this year. It seems that a lot of the promises that were made by Russia to African leaders last time didn't actually pan out. It seems like, for certain African nations and certain African leaders, that this was a summit that was sort of right up their alley. There's a lot of rhetoric. There was a lot of anti-West, the conspiracy theories, and they were pushing on their main points, with the economic system not being tied to the dollar, Russia being in a defensive situation against Ukraine rather than the aggressor. These are things that would be familiar to Abiy if he would have stayed around, particularly Eritrea. This idea of reversing the victim and offender, that sort of narrative is very popular, and it's easy to put across. There was a lot of misinformation that seemed to come out of this that you can pretty much expect out of a situation like this. There weren't very many surprises that came out of this conference, but I don't see any meaningful progress being made on any of maybe Russia's priorities. I think Russia's priorities was certainly to get people to show up, was what they wanted to have happen, to have this picture of solidarity with African nations, which Russia appears to be doing well, at least with certain African governments. I'm not so sure the people are there with them, but I mean, it sort of went the way one would expect it to win. I don't think that this was a great victory for Russia. I'm not sure that the African countries really got what they wanted or will get what they were told they're going to get, which he promised grain shipments, and I think somebody got a helicopter, which is fantastic. But I don't see this as a major development. I see this as sort of a pageant to that extent.
Great, thank you, Duke. I just want to play this, Faisal. Unlike, I don't know if African leaders are used to talk like that in such summits, but the Senegalese president specifically talked about how small countries and gave the example of Eritrea hindering our work. Let me just play that one if I can, and I want you to comment on that.
ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትሩ ወደ ሞስኮ ከመብረራቸው አስቀድሞ ባሉት ቀናት የሩሲያ ባላንጣው ለሆኑት ዜሌንስኪ ደውሎ መነጋገራቸው ዲፕሎማሲ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር
hinder our work, Eritrea or other states that sometimes small countries like Eritrea or other states that sometimes hinder our work.
ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ የሩሲያ አፍሪካን ስብሰባ አቋርጠው መጡም። ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትሩ የሞስኮውን ስብሰባ አቋርጠው
just given this speech and your overall impression of what was happening between Eritrea and others.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if the interpreter took it the liberty to add the name Eritrea. It's not usually diplomatic for another country to just jump in. It could be something that the interpreter deducted from the conversation, but nonetheless, it was a slap in the face of Eritrea, what the Senegalese president was saying. And he was basically really blaming some countries, anybody can translate which that country was, to really mess the power of balance. Maybe he wanted to say Africa, and he mentioned all the AU and the chairperson of the AU and all that in his introductory remarks. He probably wanted, or we don't know, they probably had a different session where they agreed to put a collective package in front of Russia, such as prioritizing the delivery of the wheat and what have you. I'm just speculating, but I think he meant, anybody can guess that he was intending to say Eritrea is the country, and I think these countries like Senegal are worried about the proliferation of weapons and armed groups in the quasi democratic countries that are at least trying their best, Senegal being one of them. But I think one big loss to Putin and his team was Kenya's absence. Basically, at the Paris conference, you recall, Ruto was very vocal about restructuring the international monetary system. We are getting, right or wrong, that Western countries pressured him not to attend because he carries the weight, and probably when a lot of presidents heard, or prime ministers, they probably stayed. Somalia is also in that category where Hassan Sheikh Mohamud skipped, although there is a history of friendship between Russia and Somalia, with the exception of some short period that Russia switched to Ethiopia during Mengistu Haile Mariam. So I think, US was playing its role in the background, and it really resulted in the direction that they wanted.
Thank you for that. Yes. So here, maybe this is not the final one, but this is a map showing which countries were present at head state level. You have the ones with red, and then you have the absentees like Kenya, and then some represented by ministers. But for example, Sudan, I think I saw in the picture that Burhan was there. If I see this picture, I think Burhan was somewhere here. And we see the Minister of Defense of Ethiopia on the rightmost corner. So this must be after Abiy left the summit, I guess. So it's not like what we saw in 2019, or like Faisal said, what we saw in the US Africa Summit. Duke, again, I'm sure, you know, there has been a lot of US tolerating, I don't know if that's the word, Eritrea or Isaias Afwerki, and maybe hoping against all odds he would behave and so on. Is there anything that the US might be reading differently this time, in your view, or is it business as usual after whatever he was saying? He actually, some people interpreted that he was asking Putin to declare World War III and, you know, be with him.
Yeah, I mean, what the U.S. could interpret from this, it was mostly sort of business as usual, giving Eritrea more of a platform to you know, describe the world as seen by Eritrea, by the Eritrean government. But I mean, what became very obvious was that greater influence from Russia in Africa translates into greater influence of Eritrea, greater protection for Eritrea, for its human rights policies, for its, you know, persecution of its own people, as well as Tigrayans and you know, others around the region. I think that should be the read from it, is that, you know, if Russia becomes more influential in Africa, you will see leaders that tend more towards the authoritarian, violent authoritarian side of Eritrea become more influential as well. But this is, like Faisal was saying, this was sort of the Russian Eritrean show that was happening, and it's gotta probably sit unwell with the United States to see Eritrea have such a prominent role. It's particularly with Ethiopia attending the conference, at least in part. That had to be a little bit of a slap in the face. This is a country that the United States is trying to rehabilitate their image on the world stage, and it doesn't seem to be something that is going particularly well. So I think that the U.S. probably looks at it as a little bit of a success that not very many people showed up for the conference. And the stuff that you hear out of Eritrea is just more of it seemed like more of the same. If there was new rhetoric there, I didn't hear it, but it seemed like pretty much more of the same for the United States.
Thank you, Duke. Faisal, on the outcome, so there was a lot of talk about grain initiative and so on. Some, like the Egyptian president, urging to renew that initiative. So anything, because the reports are showing that no kind of New Deal or what Africans were waiting, at least the leaders that showed up, they didn't get what they were looking for.
Yeah, let me just touch a couple of things with regards to your question. I think the US is reading for what this was. Number one, I'm sure CIA and experts will be analyzing Isaias's speech. First, he didn't even have a text that he was reading from. So he was just blurbing, and sometimes he was using street language that you don't expect from a president whose word is, if and every word that she says would be analyzed and overanalyzed. So he was just like, you know, sometimes he's losing control or coming back repetitive himself. And that tells us he was not, didn't prepare. There also comes an image that he was desperate, literally desperate. He may not say internal pressures are there, but the way he was trying to beg Russia to put him on the spot as a prime person is desperate. He was venting, talking about a hegemonic relationship that Russia has and stuff like that. And basically, really, he's looking a way out. Internal pressures economically. He probably, in his later years of running that country for over 30 years, he's finally realizing that he has to feed and deliver something to the people. So he sees Russia as a way out. I think that's how they would, analyze. Can you repeat the question? I just probably lost.
Yeah, I'll repeat that question, but I think it's interesting you are mentioning. I know you are not into body language reading, but everything. I mean, the way even the Russians were reacting to this.
Yes.
Just if you can, develop that further.
No, absolutely. And he's forgetting that these people have KGB and psychologists and psychoanalysts, as you said, body readers, people who will start from the day he arrived to this room and how he's prepared. And they would just, they were bewildered. They, in a way, I mean, I could see the foreign minister and this other gentleman, and they are saying, and he even said, I'm not flattering you. I mean, I've never seen a leader ever speaking. Look at that body language. I've never seen a leader talking like this. So is this Isaiah's really kind of so desperate to the point where he tried to convince Putin, who himself is in a trap, to be, and then to analyze like he is social analyst as to how first they will hit Russia, then they will go back and hit China, and China shouldn't trust. It was just what Somalis call fadukutir, those people who stay and discuss at tea shops and pontificate. Really, and I it's really sad. As a Somali, I felt very bad for the Eritrean masses who have paid dear, cost to get where they are and to be subjected to. I mean, Russia doesn't have good record. I'm not saying the West has an excellent record either, but Isaias was really a sad case.
Yeah, one of the points he mentioned is like, this war didn't start now. It started 30 years ago, all that and so on. So, I think the Russians must be like, okay, maybe we didn't realize we were in a war for a long time. Anyway, so the question I asked is about the outcome. So people were expecting more about grains than anything else, right?
Yes. So I think they were looking. I don't think anybody's looking from Russia a long-term development, and I'll say that. But I think they're looking for an immediate delivery of wheat, which is what some countries, particularly certain countries, need. Other countries who were there, so Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, they probably need quick delivery of food. Whether Russia on the African scale can match USAID and EU combined when it comes to disaster prevention and delivery, although they have their own weakness, I don't know. I think anybody who views the world regularly would say no, Russia cannot. The question is the delivery for the immediate countries. That may not happen because days before or around that they bombed Odessa, where is the most of the Ukrainian, wheat is shipped, and up to this point there is no. I talked to some Somalis who are very much into this, and they have said there is nothing concrete in terms of the development. Russia doesn't have what it takes to help Africa develop, really. And it's not Russia's fault, it's Africa's fault. Since the 1960s, Africa's development model has always been traveling on the wrong road. Somehow, Africa has not gotten a model to develop its country the same, or region the same way Singapore and South Korea and Taiwan and others did. Whatever is wrong, and this is a huge field in terms of development studies. Different models have been tried, but the ones that they have been following, which gives a high status to World Bank and IMF, has always put Africa in a dire need and in a bad situation. So while the IMF is there and World Bank and Africa still needs, but to expect those two entities to develop Africa's economy is really a pipe dream, in my opinion. So Russia cannot help. The West can probably help on the edges, but unless Africa comes with its own model to develop and feed its people, it would just be a politics as usual.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. Duke, I just want you to continue on that. So the Black Sea Initiative, from the Pope to many leaders, they were hoping that this would be renewed. It ended, I think, July 17th. So what is your take in terms of, you are talking about as well, misinformation around that?
Yeah. I mean, that's where you see a lot of the misinformation. I mean, it is true that only 3% of the food from the Black Sea Initiative went to sub-Saharan Africa, but the rhetoric that's being spun right now that I've seen on social media, and I've even seen in some of the articles, has been that 97% that the rest of it went to Europe to feed pigs or whatever. That's not true. 24% of the food from the Black Sea Initiative went to China. Around 40% went to European countries. There's a significant amount went to Spain, Italy. But this is, this is a distorted reality to try to soften the blow, or to try to paint this as Putin once again defying Western Europe to, take back control of the food system on behalf of the oppressed peoples of the world. And I don't necessarily think that that's the case. A lot of the leaders were pushing very hard for Russia to allow the shipping port to continue. But I think that they knew that it was not going to happen. I don't think that Russia is willing to cave on that unless it gets, whatever it's demanding for itself. I don't think it's going to do so on behalf of Africa. But there is a legitimate concern that only 3% of the food is going to Africa, where you do have a significant amount of hunger. Why is that? Why are not more grain shipments going to the World Food Program? Why isn't this going to the people in Africa? Well, in the case of the World Food Program, it's somebody asked me the other day, what's the impact going to be on Ethiopia? There will be an impact as far as inflation and the food costs and everything like that. But in the places that I'm looking at, where humanitarian aid is what is needed right now, there's not going to be an impact in the immediate term because no food's being distributed. The World Food Program is not doing a great job managing its own supplies, its own distribution, its own operations. And so it's of course more challenging now that this area of able to get food at a decent cost is shut down, but it's not as devastating to the World Food Program because they're not able to get the food out in the first place, and the funding has dried up from the West, from historic donors to food security. That's drying up now. The 50,000 tons of grain that was promised to a number of countries, whether that materializes or not is not clear, because I think that would have to go through, they would have to have agreements in place with other countries that were not consulted on this announcement, such as I think Turkey and Qatar or something would have to be a party to that sort of transaction. But we do have to wonder why more food isn't going out to Africa if there is a level of starvation. Now, of course, food security is the goal there for Africa. Africa can make enough food to feed Africans, and that should of course be every country's goal. But until that happens, while there's still starving people, there should be more aggression to secure more food. I remember Ethiopia, maybe 6 months ago or so, was talking about how they were not going to import any food, any wheat whatsoever, because all of this was going to be grown in Oromia. They were going to have food security. About every 2 weeks, we get a social media post from the president of Oromia saying that, thanking God for food security that hasn't quite happened yet, and there's still a significant number of people in Oromia that are starving to death. And that messes with the narrative in Ethiopia to import food. So I don't know what the answer is there, but the fact that this food isn't going to the people who need it the most is, that's a question that needs to be addressed, even if there's a lot of disinformation about where the food's actually going. The fact that it's not going to people who need it needs to be addressed. And I don't think they got that outcome. The 50,000 grains of food, I mean, that would be what, maybe a fifth of what the United States is giving to Ethiopia. I know Ethiopia wasn't one of the countries, but this is the value of that in some of these countries, though, is more than USAID or World Food Program, because of course with the World Food Program, they at least try to ensure that the food goes to people who need it. When Russia sends food, when China sends a development project, when something like that happens, that of course is up to the government to decide, we're going to give food to this group or to that group to shore up, support for one thing or the next. So they may look at that as something that's more valuable than food going to the people who most need it, because people who most need food are generally not the most politically powerful people in the country. And so that might be helpful for them. But as far as other outcomes, I know they had a proposal for peace for Ukraine and Russia that he said he'd look at, that Putin said he'd look at, but was perhaps untenable. I don't think that's going anywhere. So, I mean, the outcomes of it, whatever they were promised may or may not happen. And I think the promises even fell short of maybe what they hoped for, but maybe not fell short of expectations. I'm not sure.
Great. Thank you, Druk, for that. Faisal, this is the last question before your final thought. So you started with Ethiopia not being or being between a rock and a hard place in terms of what Eritrea is doing and might do and so on. So this is the only thing we saw from the Prime Minister, saying that as usual it's a generic statement, warm reception and candid discussion and historical ties and so on. But there were, I think you tweeted as well, in terms of Russia for civilian nuclear power. I don't know if that has been confirmed, but do you see anything that would come out of this specifically for Ethiopia, for the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think this is not the first time Prime Minister Abiy is requesting a nuclear power energy. He also approached France several months ago, and they were bewildered, and he asked that. So this is the second time this news is surfacing. I think it's very difficult for Russia to navigate in the Horn of Africa's politics at this particular juncture, really, unless Abiy and Isaias are in the same camp. Russia will have difficulty to help Ethiopia and Eritrea if they are not in the same camp. If they are in the same camp, which is Abiy completely walks away from the West, like Isaias did, then Russia can have these two states as satellite states in the Horn of Africa, one having the coast, the other one having the population. But I think Prime Minister Abiy and the Ethiopian elite at this point in time need something different than what Isaias needs. I think they need economic help, relief aid, and international loans and debt relief. Those are the big items that Prime Minister Abiy would like anybody to help. and Russia is not in a position to do that. I think Washington is working around that, not 100%, but around that. And if Abiy stays away from Isaias, then he can have his own path to completely have diplomatic relationship with Russia, but only diplomatic relationship that doesn't fall into or put him into his camp. And I think they have to make that decision within the coming few. I'm sure they will be talking behind the scene. I think Abiy did not like how he was sidelined. I think knowing him and what we have seen now, he would have liked to be the second top speaker, probably next to the South African or the Senegalese president. But for whatever reason, he was not given that opportunity. And then the walk away and all that is just the last stage. From his statement, it's a very lame diplomatic language after he visited. So he's in a tough spot at this point in time. And with Eritrea casting its lot with Russia for the purpose of getting more weapons, already Eritrea and Isaias probably playing the game much earlier. I think Isaias anticipates that his relationship with Abiy will not last for many reasons that we don't have to go through. But the Pretoria Agreement, the very fact that they belong to two different camps, I think Isaias is already looking forward, and whether Abiy is looking equally forward, I cannot tell. The only danger I see here, Getachew, is that the whole discussion of the port access has surfaced. Isaias was very active in the relocation of several political parties to Ethiopia when 2018 change happened, including some local administrations such as the Somali administration, where they have had relationship with Isaias. He is having Ethiopia on its policy, and how Abiy would walk away from that is something we have to watch in the coming few months.
Great. Thank you, Faisal, for that. Again, maybe we can close this with Lucas. What is your final thought, parting thought for the day?
Well, my final thought is that we have gone a long ways without food assistance in Ethiopia, and this is not where we should be right now. We shouldn't be talking about where food is coming from for Tigray. Food should be there. We should be talking about development, reconstruction, all of these things that are more attractive, more interesting to donors, that people get excited about. Those should be what we're talking about right now. We're still talking about food. The blunder that has been made in Ethiopia as far as food distribution and food assistance is sort of indicative of a weak position that the United States has in many African countries that makes that makes the region very vulnerable to Russian influence, to outside influence. The way that the war has been handled with Tigray and the atrocities that have been committed against the Tigrayan people, the way that's been handled by the United States has created a marketplace for countries like Russia, China, India to come in and excuse or provide shelter at the UN Security Council or other various human rights committees and stuff to block any sort of accountability for the crimes that have been committed. Those play into their hands. I mean, when you get to the point where you have Russia as a friend, it's usually because you need Russia as a friend. Ethiopia has been there before, where it sort of put a little bit too much weight into a relationship with Russia during a time that Russia was in pretty bad shape, or the Soviet Union at the time, and that didn't work out very well. But when they look towards the United States and see that no food is coming, no food is being distributed. I know that some cash transfers are still happening. I believe that it's only food distribution that's been shut down, but also the nutritional assistance has been shut down at a time when they need it the most. At a time when there's no food, children 5 and under are no longer getting nutritional assistance. I mean, some are, but the level has been decreased by about 66% in the past couple of months. all of these are all unforced errors that were created by the posture of the United States towards Ethiopia, trying to play both sides of this game to, not offend the government, but at the same time try to, spouting this rhetoric about human rights and adhering to international norms and stuff, things that they have absolutely no interest in pursuing beyond the statements. These are policies that come back to bite you in a way that makes countries less trustworthy in the United States, and for good reason, and less, willing to be allies with the United States on important things. And until we get our collective act together as far as what we're doing in Ethiopia, we're going to be left with this incoherent policy that does not benefit Ethiopians. It doesn't benefit the United States of America. It doesn't benefit the American people. There's no benefit right now in America to what we're doing. It's covering the asses of some of the senior officials, senior leadership, political leadership, but it's not doing anything for the people of Ethiopia. It's not doing anything for the people of the United States of America. When you have a situation like that, and a relationship like that, then it becomes a disaster. And that's what we're seeing right now in Tigray. The hunger in Tigray has been, it's not just in Tigray anymore. The longer this food suspension goes on, the more people will be suffering, the more people will die. It is unbelievable that it is still going on at this point, because I don't see an exit strategy for USAID or for World Food Program out of this conundrum that they're in right now. And I think that people need to start calling out, particularly the World Food Program, on some of their practices in Ethiopia that led up to this suspension, that led up to this environment where aid could get stolen or diverted. And some of the statements that have been made since then, the lack of information, but the lack of statements that have been made since then, and some of the contradictory statements that have been made since then, really paints a very disturbing picture of what's happening with a very important subject, which is food security. It's something that can be addressed effectively, and does not have to be the most important topic of any conversation. When it is the most important topic of a conversation, that's when things are going very badly. And that's where we're at right now.
Great. Thank you, Duke, for that. And Faisal, the final word is yours today.
Yeah, I will be brief. I think one issue that is eye-catchy is the hunger in Tigray and the demonstration of the veterans over there. I have a suspicion that Addis Ababa is trying to outsource its problems to Mekelle, in which case they don't have to worry. And I think President Getachew Reda and his team have, a latent bomb in their hands, because the federal government of Ethiopia seems to have just feel comfortable with, Tigray region handling its own headache without any financial backing. So that is an issue that really worries us. The other thing is, I think the whole food politics in Africa, especially wheat, is largely an urban issue. The people who really consume wheat is mostly urban issue. When it's a food crisis and famine, and Russia is not really there, but this wheat issue is mainly an urban issue. So I just want to underscore that, and how that is pressing for the government can be understood, because governments don't like to not solve or address urban issues right away. And then lastly, I think more and more the Amara Fano groups are creating headache and sort of sleeplessness for Prime Minister Abiy and his government. The killing of government employees and PP administrators is very, very sinister in a way, and may not really help the Fano groups. And if this continues, then we can see ugly pictures in the streets of Wollo and Gondar and Gojam. So the Fano issue is again a very serious issue. I don't know how much attention they are giving, but this is really some issue to watch out.
Great. Thank you so much, Faisal, for that. And UMD Media is under HBS, Foreign Broadcasting Services, can be viewed as well in the Horn of Africa. That is satellite, Yahsat frequency 12073, polarization H, symbol rate 27500. So those who followed us online today, we thank you very much. And Faisal Robla, Duke Burbridge joined me today from both East and West Coast. Thank you, gentlemen, and good night.
Good night.
You have been watching us on live on line, and now we will also broadcast this on satellite under HBS. HBS was off satellite for the past 2-3 weeks because of financial issues. So those who really want to see diverse voices heard and watched in the Horn of Africa, please support HBS, Horn Broadcasting Services. UMD Media is among many other medias that are broadcasted at under HBS, Horn Broadcasting Services. This was the show for today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Good night from here.